continue our journey, our Jewish journey. I wouldn't want you to think it was an Irish journey through the Gospel of John. Now, just as we normally do, I want to do a brief recap, and this week we will do it as normally with a brief film overview of what we covered last week. What we've seen is that Yeshua is arrested. He's taken to the godfather of high priests, to Annas, prior to being taken to technically the high priest, the son-in-law of the godfather, the Yeshua and Caiaphas. But right now we're dealing with a preliminary hearing, not a trial. And you got to go through Annas first before you get there. Now, a reminder of where we are. We are in we're looking east right now, and we're looking at the upper area here. This is the area where the home of Annas and Caiaphas would have been. We're not exactly sure. We have 2 or 3 options, but nonetheless, that's where we are, the old city, right in the top left corner there. You can see it today. We are brought into the home, something like this, with a doorway and a courtyard and then an inner large room where there would be the ability to have some sort of a confrontation between Annas and Yeshua, with another wing in this large complex where he would eventually be brought to Caiaphas. We see the high priest question Yeshua about 2 things. 2 things are what he's concerned about in this inquiry: who his followers are, his disciples, and what his teaching is. So who's following him? How large are you? How large is this potential insurrection, whatever, this troublemaking rabble-rousers? And what kind of monkey business are you teaching? But of course, we cut away to Simon, and Simon Peter standing there warming themselves. They said to him, "You're not one of his disciples, are you?" And for the 3rd time, he denies that he knows Yeshua, not just denying that he knows Yeshua, denying that he follows Yeshua, that he is under the authority of Yeshua. He denied it and said, "I am not." The cock crows. Peter remembers what Yeshua had proclaimed. Well, we're going to proceed now, but as we've discovered in our Jewish journey through the Gospel of John, that John being the final gospel to be composed, it largely relies on the readers already having a certain level of common knowledge of the events that are contained in the 3 synoptic gospels. So whether John is familiar with 1 gospel, 2 gospels, or all 3 of the gospels, he certainly knows the famous stories that have been circulating about Yeshua, and he focuses in on the things that are not provided in the synoptic gospels. The hearing, the inquiry before Annas being a superb example. However, the problem for us going forward is that in a world where we cannot presume that everyone who is following along, walking along on this Jewish journey with us, that everyone is familiar with the synoptic gospels, with Matthew, Mark, Luke, with the events that occurred in Yeshua's life that John is leaving out. I think it's critical in these last hours prior to his execution. I think it is important that we have a comprehensive view. And so today, we're going to leave John just for today. We'll come back by the end of today. But just for today, we're going to leave John, and we're going to follow along over what John skips over, and that is the confrontation with Caiaphas. John simply mentions it, but I think we need to explore it so that we truly are coordinated between what Matthew, Mark, and Luke are providing, what most of the early church reading John's gospel would have already been familiar with, and what John is providing us. So we get a beautiful, comprehensive, three-dimensional, or so we say four-dimensional picture. So we leave Jesus now. We pick up Jesus, having seen Peter deny him. We remember the words of Jesus that he recited at the Upper Room Discourse just a few chapters prior, 2 chapters prior. Behold, an hour is coming and has already come for you to be scattered, each to his own home. These are his disciples. These are ones who, like Peter, said, I'm ready to die for you. And they're all scattered, each to his own home. And to leave me alone, and yet I am not alone, because the Father is with me. But nonetheless, for right now, Yeshua, who is always surrounded in the Gospels with followers, is now truly in the den of his enemies, people who seek his life, provocation to take his life. He is now alone, standing alone. And yet even alone, the Father is with him. Yeshua never alone. This, by the way, anybody know what this funky looking box is? Can you get this at the Container Store? Yes, it is an ossuary. God bless you. It is an ossuary of Josephus Caiaphas. It says it's got his name on it, and it's in the Israeli Museum today. I showed you this. That's one of the things I know for sure that we covered in the Israeli Museum when we were there. Those of you who went with me to Israel, and his bones are long turned to dust, but nonetheless, this is where his bones were collected. This is the nice, fancy, schmancy ossuary of the high priest. And the good news for us is that we don't follow somebody whose bones were in an ossuary. We follow someone who was in a tomb for under 3 days and never again to die. Well, let's pick up in Mark 53. And they led Jesus to the high priest. Now, we're going from one high priest, again, the godfather of high priests, Annas, to Josephus Caiaphas, the official high priest. Right? Cross the hall, down the complex, hard to say, right? But it's not across town. Right? And all the chief priests and the elders and the scribes came together, which is Mark's way of saying the Sanhedrin gathered. Now, the Sanhedrin were composed of 71 Supreme Court judges. Right? These are the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes, the chief priests. These are the headmachers, the most important and respected men in all of Israel. They are placed on the Supreme Court, the Sanhedrin. But you did not need all 71 to convene. And since we're dealing with a kind of a kangaroo hearing, trial, whatever this thing is, and it's not in the official location of the Supreme Court of the Sanhedrin, which would have been in the temple, but it's actually occurring ad hoc style in Caiaphas's home. My assumption here, and the assumption of most scholars, is that we're dealing with simply a quorum, and you only needed 23 to make a quorum. This is, remember, a holiday evening when most people are snug as a bug in their rug this late at night. They are in their homes. They've had a big, heavy meal, lengthy meal, reclining, 4 cups of wine. They're not running out to Caiaphas's house for some trial, ad hoc trial in the dead of night, unless they have an axe to grind, unless they really are highly motivated to do so. But you only needed 23 of the 71. Anyway, they came together. Now the chief priests and the whole council were seeking testimony against Yeshua to put him to death, but they found none. See, the way a trial works in ancient Israel in front of the Sanhedrin is, generally speaking, you need witnesses to speak. First of all, a defense is given by the defendant. No defense is given here. They go right to the testimony against the individual. They try to get testimony against Jesus that would be worthy of capital punishment, which their hands are pretty tied regarding capital punishment. They do not have the authority to pronounce capital punishment, with the exception of, just a few violations. Blaspheming the name would be one, and that would be it had to be a heavy violation of that, and speaking against the temple, threatening or blaspheming the temple, challenging the temple, that would be another. These are the two areas under which the Jewish leadership would have had some authority to pronounce a death sentence, but even then, they would still need to coordinate with the Roman authorities. But they're looking for Yeshua to have some kind of testimony where they could really get him, stick it to him. And so they bring a variety of witnesses. For many bore false witness against him. So there were no shortage. I had a lineup of guys, apparently. But the problem with those providing false witness, the problem with lying, is that unless you make sure you all coordinate ahead of time, if it's impromptu, like this obviously was, the leadership really caught off guard on Passover because Yeshua identifies Judas as the betrayer at the beginning of the Last Supper, the beginning of the Passover. And so they're throwing a little bit off their game, we see, and so the witnesses don't have an opportunity to coordinate their lies. So their testimony does not agree, which provides a problem for the Sanhedrin. And some stood up and bore false witness against him, saying, "We heard him say," quote, "I will destroy this temple that is made with hands." See, now we're getting at it. Now we're getting somewhere. He's threatening the temple. "I will destroy this temple that is made with hands, and in 3 days I will build another not made with hands." And this is an interesting witness. It's an interesting testimony, because in the Synoptic Gospels, you hear this idea, okay, well, they're making out, where are they getting this from? The Synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they actually don't give us the statement that Yeshua actually said, on which they are misrepresenting the original statement. John does. Remember, he front loads this story in the second chapter. And so the Jewish leadership said to him, "What sign do you show us for doing these things?" And Jesus answered and said, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." The Jewish leadership then said, "It's taken 46 years to build the temple, and will you raise it up in 3 days?" But he was speaking about the temple of his body. So John gives us the source of the distortion we get in the synoptic trial account. Yet even about this, their testimony did not agree. Did he say, "I'm going to destroy this temple," and he's going to rebuild it, he's destroyed it with hands, without hands? They couldn't get the witnesses to agree, even in misrepresenting a very clear statement that Yeshua had said. And then again, that's a problem according to the Torah, according to Deuteronomy 19. "A single witness shall not rise up against a man on account of any iniquity or any sin which he has committed. On the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses, a matter shall be confirmed." This is doubly, triply important, critical, when you're dealing with something of capital consequence. This is not just, hey, did this guy have his hand in the cookie jar? This is a matter of life and death. You need at least two witnesses that agree with one another, and the Sanhedrin couldn't find them. So the high priest takes matters into his own hands. He's frustrated. You can see he's frustrated. And he stood up. This is Caiaphas now, the son-in-law of Annas. He stood up in the midst and asked Jesus, "Have you no answer to make?" Which, in a Jewish trial, according to Jewish law, it's actually not legal to demand that someone testify on his own behalf. Okay? If he wants to, he can. But you can't demand that he answer the witnesses. He can make a voluntary defense, but you can't demand it of him. Have you no answer to make? He says, because Jesus is not saying anything. What is it that these men testify against you? We can't make their testimony agree. Why don't you help us out and see if you can tie it all in a nice bow with a knot so that we can convict you of something? But Yeshua, he remained silent and made no answer. Grace under pressure? Yeah, absolutely. But more than that, the fulfillment of prophecy. Isaiah chapter 53, written more than 6 centuries before this trial occurred, spoke of the servant of the Lord, the suffering servant. And in the 7th verse of chapter 53, he relates that he was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, like a sheep that is before its shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. This is a theme that we're going to see. Isaiah 53 is going to play another role later on when we come back to John, later on in his confrontation, his trial's confrontation with Pilate. Again, the high priest asked him, so fix our testimonies, make them work out against you. No, you're not going to do that? All right. Then I'm going to ask you straight, as straight as I possibly can. Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed? Blessed in Mark, this is a euphemism. It's like we say, blessed is the Blessed One in our prayer. It's a euphemism, right? It's a way of saying God without actually calling him by his sacred name, by his covenant name. So, are you the Messiah, who is obviously the Son of God? Are you Mashiach, Son of God? Or another way of saying it in Greek, are you Christos, the Son of the Blessed? Put up or shut up. Are you not Christ, the Son of the Blessed? Now Yeshua opens his mouth. Now he asks them a question to which he must provide a straight answer. In fact, in one of the other synoptic gospels, Yeshua and Caiaphas is quoted as saying, as I adjure you, I put you under oath, I command you under oath. Are you not the Christ, the Son of God, Messiah? And at that point, Yeshua is very straightforward. More straightforward than Caiaphas would have been prepared for. Let me show you what I mean. And Jesus said, I am, but I'm not done. And you will see the Son of Man, not just the Son of God, the Messiah. I'm also known by another name in the Scripture. You may be familiar with it. It's from Daniel. You will see the Son of Man, the Bar Enash in Aramaic, seated at the right hand of power. Psalm 110. And coming with the clouds of heaven. What is Yeshua doing? He's answering the question, but he's answering even further with far more audacity than anyone anticipated that night. What is he doing? He's quoting, first of all, Daniel 7, 13 through 14. We've seen this so many times studying John. I dare say this is probably our 10th time, I don't know, looking at this particular verse, because Son of Man is such a critical theological foundation of what Yeshua does throughout the book of John, and all the times he calls himself the Son of Man, the Bar Enash. He's not just saying, hey, and the regular guy is going to do. No, he's saying this apocalyptic figure of Daniel. Let's read the passage. Behold, with the clouds of heaven, Daniel has a vision. Behold, with the clouds of heaven, there came one like a son of man. And he came to the Ancient of Days, that's the Lord, God and was presented before him. So someone who looks human is presented before God, presented before him, and to him, this guy who looks human, up in the sky with God, in the presence of God, being able to look at God, which is unique to begin with. And to him was given dominion and glory. In case you don't understand what dominion and glory is. Okay, a kingdom. Let's put it in plain English. That all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. It's a fairly comprehensive list. All peoples, nations, languages. Not a lot of room for anybody else. In other words, everyone should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away. Two ways of saying the same thing. Everlasting dominion, it will not pass away. Same idea. And his kingdom, one that shall not be destroyed. Again, another way of saying everlasting dominion. This is what God gives to this Son of Man who is standing in his presence, receiving all this glory. Yeshua identifies himself as that apocalypse. You want to know if I'm the Messiah? You want to know if I'm the Son of God's Messiah? You bet I am. Furthermore, I am the Bar Enash. That passage that you wish wasn't actually in the Scripture, but is. And so it's Jewish people today. They love to ignore the prophet Daniel. Daniel, is that New Testament, Old Testament? Is it apocryphal? What's Daniel? Never read it. They're encouraged not to read Daniel because you'd have to deal with thorny passages like this. Well, how about one that's actually not that uncommon? Psalm 110. Right? Jewish people then, Jewish people now love the Psalms. The Lord said to my Lord, 110:1, most commonly used Old Testament passage, Hebrew Scripture passage in the New Testament, Messianic prophecy. The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool. Yeshua standing before the Sanhedrin, let's say 23, of the leaders of Israel. Yeshua and Caiaphas, are you not? Says, you bet I am. That's in the original Aramaic. You bet I am. Furthermore, I am the Son of Man, the Bar Enash. And remember Psalm 110? You're going to see me sitting at the right hand of power. It's another euphemism like the Blessed One. It's a way of saying the Lord without actually using that term. It's a Jewish way of expressing the idea, the right hand of power. Well, the high priest tore his garments. The high priest not allowed to tear his garments under any circumstances, not for mourning, not for anything, right? Except in the presence of blasphemy. And so he tears his garments and says, well, we don't need any more phony baloney witnesses. The guy's incriminated himself. What further witnesses do we need? You have heard his blasphemy. What is your decision? And they all condemned him as deserving death. Now, Joseph of Arimathea, he wasn't there. You have Nicodemus, he wasn't. So you have the supporters, whatever support Yeshua had on the Sanhedrin of Jewish leadership, they were not invited to this party. All you needed was 23, and so they collected the opposition, and they condemn him as deserving death. But they're kind of toothless. So they condemn him as deserving death. They've got to now consult with the Roman authorities. And some begin, so before they get there, because it's still dark, and Pontius Pilatus is not in the praetorium yet. He doesn't begin until dawn, until sunrise. So they got some time to kill. And since they've already very quickly finished the trial up, very, very efficient, thanks to Yeshua's straightforward confession. So we got some time on our hands. How shall we spend that time? Well, how about this? Some began to spit on him. This is the leaders. These are the most respected leaders in Israel. Mature, wise. And began to spit on him and to cover his face and to strike him, saying to him, "Prophesy." And the guards received him with blows. So the temple cops who were up there with the Sanhedrin, they're beating the prisoner, the defendant, spitting, manhandling him. Well, one morning came, finally, when Matthew, now, all the chief priests and the elders of the people took counsel against Yeshua to put him to death. So we have the same ideas from John and Mark, Matthew, Luke, same stories. We're coordinating now and moving back to John. All the chief priests, the elders of the people took counsel against Jesus to put him to death, and they bound him and led him away and delivered him over to Pilate, the governor. Okay, Pontius Pilatus, the governor. And now we rejoin our narrative in John. Little excursus. Now we're back to John, those areas that John did not focus on, but others did. We now pick up the narrative. Then they led Jesus from Caiaphas into the praetorium, and it was early. This is the Antonia Fortress, where many people believe the praetorium where Pilate was residing during the Passover week. That would be the left. Look at the temple square, the left of the temple square, the left corner right there, right here. That would be that area right there. That's the traditional location. I actually don't think it was there. I believe when Pilate was staying with Herod, we'll talk more about this next week. When Pilate was staying with Herod, was staying in Jerusalem. It was at Herod's palace. This is what Herod's palace looked like. There's plenty of room for Pilate to crash for a week or so with a coterie of soldiers. This is another view of the palace of Herod. Pretty nice looking structure. And here's another view of it. This is an area that has been discovered in the past few decades, actually maybe even sooner than that, more recently than that. Steps going down to a pool. Very nice digs that Herod had. We'll talk more again about this next time, and we'll look exactly. This is the area where it was. Talk about the area where Yeshua is presented to Pilate in front of the praetorium, where he's put these little two walls right there, these two walls that are there growing out from the grass. They're a staircase in the center, and it's going up to where Pilate would have been. Here's a closer look of that. We'll get a better look of it next time. You actually can see this area. That was this area right here blown up. So the praetorium would be right over there in Herod's area. This is a little plaque, not a plaque, a stone with Pilate's name on it. It's how we know for sure that Pilate served during this time and that the Bible was actually giving us accurate information. Good confirmation. And we pick up the narrative here. Therefore, Pilate went out to them and said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" So Yeshua brought to this fancy schmancy praetorium. He's going to have to deal with the prefect of all Judea, power of Rome. Pilate asked the Jewish leaders, "What is the accusation against this man?" I'm afraid I'm going to have to leave you in suspense. We'll pick up the narrative next week, and we'll see exactly what that accusation was and how Pilate took the interrogation from there. But until that point, let us remember that we are all subject to governing authorities. Yeshua was subject to the authority of Judea and the authority of Pilate. And Yeshua was always straightforward and honest and always told the truth. To use an oft abused phrase, Yeshua always spoke truth to power. He was not intimidated. He was not cowed. He was not stymied. He told them what they needed to hear, the truth. Let us always do likewise as we follow the example of our Messiah, not being afraid to speak up and out, no matter whom is confronting us.